Is Nigeria truly on the path to economic greatness, or are we trapped in a cycle of missed opportunities after 64 years of independence? Good morning. It's another power-packed episode of Business Week. Today, we look at the Central Bank of Nigeria's introduction of a new FX electronic matching system, while Ghana and Kenya's inflation figures moving opposite directions. Goldman Sachs hints at a $20 per barrel rise in the price of oil amidst escalating tensions in the Middle East. Nigeria signs a landmark deal with 6 gas companies, and U.S. jobs figures surprise even the Fed chairman, who says a 50% basis cut last week was a mistake. Plus, we do a deep dive on Nigeria's economy at 64. This and much more. I'm Rolake Akinkube-Filani, helping you catch up, as always, if you can keep up during the week. Stay tuned. Okay, as always, it starts to look at energy commodities around the world. Now, Israel has assassinated the Hezbollah leader, right, in the Middle East. And we saw a spike in crude oil prices, the biggest weekly gain in 2024 for Brent, ending the week up at 1.42% from the previous week, followed by WTI crude as well, ending up at 1.63%. And natural gas was down. Summer months, I guess. We're entering into the winter season now, so that trajectory will change. But RBOB gasoline was also up by 0.51%. Let's take a look at global equities markets around the world, starting, of course, with Nigeria. The oil share index closing relatively positive at the end of the trading week on Friday evening. We see a 47 basis points increase in the oil share index, which ended the week at 97,520.54 points. Over 8,000 deals worth 6.202 billion and 320 million shares traded. Market cap closing the week at 56.03 trillion naira. Let's take a look at African markets. A mixed picture there. Ghana was flat. Inflation figures coming out of Ghana, not so positive. We'll talk about that in a bit. Johannesburg in South Africa, the exchange there closing the week down at 0.15%, but Casablanca and Nairobi were both up at the end of the week. Let's shoot over to Wall Street now. Big news coming out of the American market this week, and it's reflected in the figures on the stock markets. Key indices in America. Dow Jones Industrial Index posting a 36 basis points gain at the end of trading on Friday, followed by S&P 500 and, of course, the Dow Jones Nasdaq Composite Index for tech stocks. So a positive end to the week there in the US, and we'll talk about why in a jiffy. Let's look at my top picks for the week. The first one is that the UK, I beg your pardon, Sir Keir Starmer, the relatively new prime minister there, is saying that Britain should brace for a difficult economic season. Now, they're releasing the budget next week, and the growth estimates for April and June have actually turned out to be much lower than anticipated, with the economy only growing by 0.5% as opposed to what was previously reported. But the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, tried to strike a more upbeat note as she moves to release the budget for the country in November. And of course, we'll be giving you the latest on that story when it does happen. Nigeria has signed a landmark deal worth 122 billion naira with 6 gas companies under the Midstream and Downstream Gas Infrastructure Fund. Now, that's a fund where companies in the sector contribute about 0.5% of their revenues to the fund. And of course, that fund is also capitalized from penalties that are charged to companies for gas flaring. Now, the projects that will come under this initiative are really things like compressed natural gas, propane storage, liquefied natural gas, and so on. So good news there for Nigeria's midstream gas sector, with the government looking to boost that through these revenues in the fund that they get from petroleum product imports, actually. Let's look at Kenya. Kenya's inflation has eased to 3.6, which is below the midpoint that the government targets for inflation in Kenya. The government has a target of between 2.5 and 7.5%. That mid-range is about 5%. So it's 3.6% figures, doing quite well. We've also seen the Kenyan shilling strengthen against the US dollar. In fact, it's the best performing currency this year against the US dollar. That has also aided the inflation figures, which are going down. The government, the Central Bank of Kenya, did cut interest rates at the last sitting in August. So clearly seeing the economic blue skies on the horizon, as opposed to Ghana, where inflation has actually picked up to 21.5% after 3 successive rounds of inflation easing. Now, interestingly, the Ghana Central Bank cut interest rates by 200 basis points. So it took a very bullish approach to the inflation outlook, which now doesn't seem to be materializing. Now, the question is, what will the Central Bank of Ghana do at the next round of reviewing its interest rates? A hold, possibly an increase, might be on the horizon, given some of these inflation figures. We'll move on to Nigeria now, where we're seeing a landmark merger between 2 of the biggest pension fund managers in Nigeria. Asset Holdings and ARM have merged to create an entity called Access ARM Holdings after approval from the Pension Commission of Nigeria. Now, this new combined entity will now control 15% of the pension market in terms of assets under management. Today, that figure is about 20.9 trillion in assets under management in Nigeria, with this particular entity, the new combined entity, Access ARM, contributing about 3 trillion naira in assets under management. So good news there for the pension sector. Around 10.4 million Nigerians are in the pension pot. Not a huge amount considering the working population, but they say baby steps, right? The last story in my top picks this week is the U.S. jobs growth figures, which have come in positive. The U.S. added 72,000 new jobs in July and August. And in fact, there were fears that the Fed was overcooling the economy by raising interest rates successively. Of course, the last round was a 50 basis points cut, which Fed Chair Jerome Powell has now said may have been overkill. You know, he did actually use the word may have been a mistake because perhaps they were too fearful around the prospects of what interest rates might do to the economy. This is good news. Now, who is it good news for heading into the election season in the US, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? Well, we'll just have to wait. That's it for my top picks for the week.